Welcome to today's AWI Extension New South Wales webinar. My name's Nicole Logg and I'm from the Livestock Coach, and today I'm going to be talking about success with grazing crops. So let's get into it. I really wanted to bring in some of the aspects of plant design in our grazing crops, what we know about them, what's good, what gaps we might need to fill, and how we can maximise, that crop that's been specifically sown. On the other side of the scales is what do we need for sheep health and performance? What are the plants giving us? What might be out of balance? And how we can mesh the two together so we can get the best growth and health of our sheep whilst maximising that crop as well. So the first thing I wanted to just chat on, and I've really split this presentation into grazing cereal crops and grazing brassicas. So we'll come back to the brassicas in a little bit. But I really just wanted to start with cereal crops. Have been around for quite a long time now, the dual purpose crops where we can harvest them later in the season. And we're just going to go over, really how they fit into our management and cropping and livestock plan and what we can get out of them. So we really like that we can fill this early feed gap. We tend to have this late summer, autumn, early winter feed gap where everything sort of slows down and our crops can usually get out of the ground if we've got some rain and give us some of that early feed. It's that funny time between the summer grasses sort of getting a little bit more dormant, but we're waiting for our legume-based pastures and our winter grasses to really get going. So it can really fit that feed gap that we like to look for. It's particularly important too if we've got autumn lambing ewes that need that extra feed earlier on in the season. It buys us sort of some time where we can, let those legume-based pastures get going as well. We're not putting that pressure on them. It takes that pressure off those pastures to sort of get up and going. And we can graze cereals pretty hard, and we can either graze them right out, and we might be able to get one or two applications of urea in to keep them going along, or we can pull them off sort of in August and let them go through to grain harvest. So we get a little bit of money back for the effort that we've put in growing them. From a nutrition point of view, they're a really great source of energy and protein. They've got, good at least 10 megs of energy, usually more around 12 to 13. And they've got this very high protein level. So that will vary between a young crop and an older mature crop, and depending how long you let that go through in terms of the protein level. And I've got some feed tests there we'll get into in a minute and have a look at that. From the brassica side of things, I'm going to term brassica to include your grazing canolas, your tillage radish, kale if anyone's growing that. We've got the summer crops as well, but I won't speak about them in this session, but it's really on those grazing canolas and some of those other brassica type crops that we have available to us now. Now they fit in as a really nice pasture improvement program where we might need to use some other chemical classes to get rid of some weeds that we don't want in that paddock. So that can fit in really well. And it can also really help the soil structure as well, getting a big taproot into that soil and help open it up and get some moisture and water down there as well. They're also very good in terms of energy and protein. So really lovely, high energy, and again, can have very high protein levels coming in as well. And typically see them, lots of lambs going onto them after weaning and getting some pretty good growth rates as you head into that autumn and winter period. Just go to the next slide. So I just wanted to touch on, as we come into winter, like we've had a pretty mild May this year, and as we've come into winter, it's only really been the last couple of weeks where we've been getting these cold temperatures. We've got some frost. The soil temperature is actually finally sort of starting to drop. And that's the graph on your left. There's really just the typical scenario for a lot of places in New South Wales as we come into winter, as that temperature drops and the soil starts to cool. Now, when we put our crops in, if we've hopefully got them in earlier or when we can get some rain, we'll notice that the plants are really quite small. The crop at the moment, they're really still quite small. We've only just finished sowing, but those plants are still quite small. Their root system's underdeveloped. And as it gets colder, there's less movement of minerals up into the plant as well. They're just not actively as growing and can absorb those nutrients from the soil from a shallow root point of view, and also that it's got a lot colder and the absorption of nutrients and minerals slows. So it's just something to keep in mind as we head into winter and what's going on with your crops. So the plant design really, obviously plants photosynthesize. So when we typically have frosts or cold mornings, we tend to have like lovely sunny days, and that can really help obviously from how get that plant up and growing. They photosynthesize. Photosynthesization is when the plants take carbon dioxide and moisture and turn it into sugars for their own growth, and oxygen is released. So depending where your crops are at the moment, you might have these smaller crops that you're really waiting to get growing, or some other larger crops that are a little bit more further along. That's really just an assessment of how active your crops are at the time. When we get these nice sunny days, they're really actively growing. You can just about see them growing out in the paddock because we're getting lots of sunlight. We're not far off the shortest day of the year, actually, but during that sunlight time during the day, we can get them growing or have lots of fresh new leaves coming on. When we have cloudy days, there tends to obviously less sunlight coming through, and the plant growth slows for that day, for example. So we tend to have where we get nitrates accumulating, coming up and nitrogen out of the soil because the plant's not using them as quickly and in that photosynthesization process to get that energy and stores into the plant and actively growing. From a sheep point of view, lots of new leaves is good because it means that any of the nitrogen in the soil or nitrogen application has been dispersed through more leaves and sort of effectively diluted across the plant as well. And with cloudy days, from the sheep side of things, there's actually less vitamin D being absorbed through the skin. So vitamin D will come through the skin. It gets transferred into an active vitamin D in the system. Now, vitamin D is also can be consumed by the animal, and I'll just touch on here for where we pick it up later is that hay can be a source of vitamin D because it's been sun cured at the time. So that will be actually a little bit of vitamin D for the animals as well from that side of things. But where vitamin D fits in is that it's really important to part of the link with calcium in particular absorption out of the gut. So vitamin D is needed for calcium to be absorbed out of the system, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I typically see the biggest issues with low vitamin D turns into rickets with lambs, which we'll touch on as well. And that's really those autumn-born lambs that are sort of born and, pending the conditions, if they go into a cloudy winter, that's when we sort of see more of that low vitamin D and rickets popping up. Now with cereal crops, I've just got a photo here. That was a Moby barley we did for the Feed On Offer library a couple of years back now. We got that nice wide leaf on the Moby, and these are the actual test results that we got from that cut right there. So I've circled a few things in here, and it's even though that plant has got a bit of height, it's really important to note that it still contains 88% moisture. That one at the near the top of the first red circle at the top of the table there. So that's really high moisture, right? So normally it's if we see a grain test result, that's the dry matter content or a hay, for example. So really high moisture in those leaves, and that's something to be mindful of. And the other one that links in too is that while we've got all this moisture, the fibre component, and I didn't circle this one down here, but the NDF, which is the bulkiness of the feed, is really quite good at 48%. So it's when we talk about they've got a bit of guts to it now, that young short crop where it's really soft and lush. There's sort of no guts to it, we say, but that's really the lignin in the plants and getting some of that stalk going and some of those other structural components of crops as they stand up. So that NDF content's actually pretty good. So we just that really will help slow everything down through the rate of passage of feed through the system, which will help us absorb more of those nutrients. So it's just something to be mindful of if you get your feed test and seeing where your fibre content is. But we'll talk a little bit more about fibre in a minute as well. You'll see our energy is beautiful, 13.1, really great energy coming in. And the next one there is the protein. So our protein is at 27%. So even though that plant's got a fair bit of height, I sort of threw me a little bit too, but I thought it might have been coming off a little bit. But really high protein still coming in there, and it's actually excess to needs. When protein's in excess, there's only so much of it that the animal can store and use and you, basically. So it needs to be broken down and it's actually excreted through the urine. So that costs a lot of energy to the animal as well when we've got this excess protein happening. Just the last point there too I wanted to touch on was that when we have a lot of nitrogen coming into the system, that's broken down to ammonia for use and or excreted, and that can actually change the pH of the rumen and actually make it come up a little bit, and that'll play a role in the solubility and how magnesium is absorbed into the system. I'll touch on that a little later. So I've just done some quick numbers on just energy and protein and how that sort of fits in with our sheep and what they need. So I've just taken an example where we've got a 30-kilo lamb, more of an early maturing type. So we want them to get up and grow pretty quick. And that they will require around 15 megajoules a day to sort of really crank out, 280, 300 grams a day of growth. Now that lamb will eat around 1.25 kilos of dry matter per day. And I do specify dry matter. So it's not the actual amount of crop that they're going to eat. At 88% moisture, they're going to eat a lot more to sort of try and hit that 1.25 kilograms of dry matter a day. So physically they'll eat a lot more, but we talk on dry matter so it's easy to compare and understand what the animals are eating and what they're getting for the day. So they'll eat just over a kilo of dry matter. And we've got this really lovely high energy crop at 13 megs. And we multiply that by what their potential intake is, and they can get to that 16 and a half megajoules per day. Now that's what they need, and they'll to sort of crank out that high 200s, 300 grams, sometimes a little bit more per day of growth. So really, really good energy to get them growing from that perspective. And protein's the other side of the story. So if we take the same scenario, based off our sort of 27, this is a 28% protein one, had to change it just to grams per day, just to sort of comparatively ease of comparison there. But again, eating 1.25 kilos a day of a 28% protein crop, they're going to get around 350 grams per day. And that what they're coming in, and they only need roughly 170 to help them grow at that sort of 250, 300 grams a day. So we've got heaps of extra protein coming in, and really a lot of it obviously won't be used, and they need to break all that down and excrete it out through the urine, which costs them energy. So we get this energy and sort of protein imbalance where we don't have enough what we call fermentable carbohydrate and energy coming in. So one way to sort of make the use of that protein is actually to add a little bit of grain. Fermentable carbohydrate really just refers to the microbes doing their job in their big fermentation vat of the rumen and breaking down that energy where it can help those microbes utilize that nitrogen in the protein in the crop. So grain wool is deficient in calcium, and we'll talk about a lot about calcium in a minute, coupled with the features of the crop as well in terms of the mineral profile. So it's really important when you're adding grain to a bare minimum have some extra calcium out as well. So when we start to get into the mineral profile of crops, and I've done another little one here and specifically used wheat because wheat in particular, and a lot of the cereal crops in general, but wheat in particular, like all of the crops in Australia are designed to conserve water and make the most out of every drop that they have. So they will tend to be naturally low in sodium, very high in potassium, and as a side note, not as a breeding objective, is that they tend to be sort of low, moderate magnesium levels as well. So when we have these minerals, the biggest thing that happens is it can lead to some metabolic diseases in our sheep that we really need to be mindful of. So starting to really balance up what this, we've got this really great energy, loads of protein, how do we maximize that and fill the gaps on getting the most out of that crop and our sheep health. So the biggest one we sort of see in direct issues are the low calcium level, so hypocalcemia. So anything with hypo means it's low. So low calcium, it'll happen in our older ewes predominantly because they're not quite as good as absorbing the calcium out of the gut or resorbing it from their bones for use as they're trying to build fetal bone. So it'll happen in later in pregnancy, especially in the twin-bearing ewes where they've got all this bone that they've got to try and build for those multiple lambs. Low magnesium is the other one. So this I will tend to sort of see not always, but most often, is after lambing. And it's also known as grass tetany, that you can sort of see them. They'll have the shakes, their muscles are sort of contracting and not sort of doing what they should be. And that's because as they start to lactate, there's actually a fair magnesium draw through their milk into that lamb. So we sort of get this draw on magnesium. Now, magnesium is an interesting one because it's not really stored in the body very well, and it can't be pulled down and reserves drawn on. So it's one of those things that we need to sort of have coming into the system, especially at these times, quite regularly, so the room, it's actually absorbed through the rumen wall. So that's a really important one to sort of have constant supply of. We have the combination of low calcium and magnesium, and often all these things are really interrelated. But when we have both, calcium and magnesium are used for muscle function. So we get these sort of slow, lazy, difficult lambings, which can, in particular for twins, twin or multiple bearing ewes, is that if it's a very slow lambing, they're not at the birth site for as long. The sort of smell sensor turns off that it's their lamb, and by the second or possibly third lamb, they might have realised that, oh, it's switched off. That's not actually my lamb, and leave it as well. So that's some of the things that can happen when you have a really slow lambing time. I touched on before just on that vitamin D and / calcium deficiency and rickets in lambs. So as I said, can be more of an issue in those autumn late summer, autumn lambing ewes and the lambs that flow on from there. And that's all sort of because it's all really interrelated, the vitamin D and the calcium components. So the indirect issue we see too, and it really all ties in with the low calcium and low magnesium, is a pregnancy toxemia. So where we just don't have enough energy. The ewes aren't feeling very well, so they stop grazing. They might have they've got pressure literally on their rumen. So the rumen space is shrunk down as the twins and triplets perhaps, take up more room in their body. It's pushing on their rumens. They can't physically eat much, and they don't really feel like eating much. So they're not getting all that energy, that really high energy that they need coming up to lambing. And that's where everything sort of starts to fall over. So in terms of numbers, and this will just start to sort of clear up, I guess, hopefully the proportion and balance of the minerals that are coming out of cereal crops. So in this example, I've just taken a growing lamb and I've got the mineral requirements, the magnesiums, the first column there, calcium, potassium's K, sodium, and then potassium sodium ratio at the end there. So we can see with grazing wheat, for example, the magnesium's that sort of moderate kind of level there. It's not too bad. We're a little bit light on calcium coming in from the grazing wheat. So it's got some calcium in it. It's just probably not enough for a growing lamb that's building a lot of bone and frame. In terms of potassium, plenty. It's a little bit like the excess protein story. Got all this excess potassium coming into the system that we don't really need and can use. Then we have sodium. So we're a little bit shy on the sodium requirements for that lamb in a wheat crop. And then if we look at the ratio between potassium and sodium, we can see that really we want it to sit at about 8:1. And in a grazing crop, and this is pretty general for most cereal crops, we get this huge, completely out of balance potassium and to sodium ratio. And why that's important is because the cells in the body have these sodium potassium pumps. So they really got to be in balance, and they kind of, one comes in, one comes out, and they have this balance here. Now we can't pull the potassium obviously down. We can't take that out of the crop as such. So what we need to do to help balance that is we provide sodium. And that will help to balance up what's required for those cells to sort of move and keep not be shortchanged on the sodium side of things, and they can keep working properly. The table below, in terms of, this was from the grain and graze work done earlier on from the CSIRO, and they took just had a nil or control group there, took the live weight gains, they added some hay and saw that we had an improvement in live weight gain. So that would have been a lot to do with slowing that rate of passage down through the system and absorbing some of those nutrients a little bit better. And then when they added magnesium, calcium, and sodium, the things that we really need, they saw, quite a big increase in live weight gain, like 100 grams a day compared to doing nothing, for example. So, and I've got the mixture of the bottom there, 221 Corsmag, which is a magnesium oxide, limestone, and salt. So that was a combination that they used for the trial. So the connection with all of this is that really based off getting that extra sodium in to balance up the potassium to sodium ratio. Sodium's also really important. In the rumen, when it hits the rumen, it holds hands with magnesium, and it's needed to drag it across the rumen wall to be absorbed. So it's really, really important that the sodium and the magnesium also come in together. Now, what magnesium does, a whole heap of things in the system. It's involved in a lot of enzymes for metabolism and all sorts of stuff. We've got muscle contraction, but it also activates the vitamin D. So you might remember from before when I said we get the sunlight coming in for vitamin D, it's got to be converted to its active form to be able to do its job in the body. And magnesium plays a role in that as well. And then the vitamin D is then able to draw that calcium into the system through the gut wall and pull it in and out of bones as it's required from the lamb's things. So I've put it in a graph form as well. We all like to see things a little bit differently. So I've got grazing wheat down the bottom, grazing oats, thrown in a lucerne as a comparison. Compare it also against oat hay and sort of what barley grain is kind of doing there. So these are the macro minerals. So green is calcium, blue is magnesium, yellow is sodium, and the orangey color is potassium. So you can see all of our plants will have loads of potassium in there, and especially our grazing cereals. And the sodium is really quite low, so you can see really easily that's really not quite in balance. Not that we want it to be the same because the requirements are slightly different, but we do need a lot more sodium in there as well. So the magnesium and calcium compared to say like a grazing lucerne. So all of our legumes will naturally have more calcium and magnesium in them, and that sort of is shown quite vividly in the columns there. And you'll see also with our barley grain, just as an example, it's also quite low in sodium, and calcium is the other big one as well. Now on the next slide, I've just thrown in, kept that's the same grazing crops over to the right, and I've put in what our ewes actually need in terms of the calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium as well. So calcium and magnesium are really big ones, and you really can quite see that as soon as we start having twins and also into lactation, and our singles as well, that we just don't have enough calcium and magnesium in those plants to do what they need to do. That's just to meet the minimum requirements for the day as well. So you can sort of see there that we need to really boost these minerals up and help get them into the ewe and make sure that they're absorbed as well. I did the same thing with the lamb, and you can see the lamb there. We've got really quite high calcium requirements as well coming into the system, and magnesium too for lambs. So similar scenario to your sort of late pregnant and lactating ewes, where we really need all that calcium in there and magnesium component as well to help those lambs get up and get growing and do their thing. So we've touched on the minerals and how they all come together. You'll most commonly see providing sodium through salt or coarse salt. And one tip I'll give you is if you do use prepared supplements for grazing crops, commercial prepared supplements, sometimes it's an idea just to get a bag of or bags of loose salt, coarse salt, and put them out in your supplement feeders just so they can get their craving for sodium out of the way. They will have a draw for sodium. They will have an appetite for sodium. So that's a really important way to sort of let them have that without completely smashing the commercial mixes that, are a lot more expensive, and you're probably getting way more of the other minerals and trace minerals that are also provided in there as well. So that will make very expensive urine and feces. So that's a little tip just to help you out when you're starting to supplement. Is just to get that salt out to them straight away. We can provide calcium. Ground limestone's our most easy and most common way of doing that. So that's a nice one. It's really quite cheap too. Magnesium's a little bit more expensive. There's actually different forms of magnesium. We tend to see magnesium oxide or the trade name for the stuff out of Young's Cause Mag. We have a magnesium carbonate, magnesium sulfates, and magnesium chloride. So there has been work done that sulfates and chlorides will be slightly more easily absorbed into the body. And so that's something to think of. But magnesium itself isn't very palatable. And then you're going to go and add sulfates and chlorides. They're not going to eat it. So it'll be really tough. It's a really tough sell to try and get them to actually get it into their system, even though it might be a little bit more palatable than the others. So we tend to stick with magnesium oxide because it's quite readily available. Particle size is important. There's a sort of a fine one and a coarse one. So that's something to consider. We bounce in between them personally because the fine one will be absorbed a lot better, but it's really dusty if you're making up some of your own mixes as well. So the coarse one tends to be a little bit less dusty, but we might not have the quite the absorption as the others. Excuse me. One thing to consider too, just on the trace mineral side of things, and a little bit on vitamins is, this section is on trace minerals, is it when we have crops, they're typically much more up off the ground compared to some of our pastures, so there can be less ingestion of soil. Now, soil is actually quite a good source of some of these trace minerals for our sheep as well. So just bear that in mind, that some trace mineral supplementation would be quite beneficial, especially around lambing time and especially for wean lambs that we want to get up and grow from that side of things. So we did do a big webinar on supplements of success, which you can go back and have a look, where we delve into a lot more on that side of things. Righto, onto brassicas. So there's a couple of things that are a little bit different about brassicas compared to our cereal crops, and there's just sort of different compounds in there that can throw a little bit of a spanner in the works sometimes. One of those things is the glucosinolates. So there's sulfur-containing compounds naturally occurring in brassicas. I think a lot of the newer varieties don't. They've sort of bred for lower levels of glucosinolates, but one of the things that they can cause is photosensitization on immature crops, so they'll tend to be more concentrated in those young plants. The brassicas still can be a little bit low on iodine, which is needed for metabolism effectively in the system. So that's where you might, if you've got pregnant ewes grazing brassicas, those lambs might be born a little bit iodine deficient, so they could have a goiter. You can notice in the thyroid gland there, they can have goiters, and that issue is exacerbated by glucosinolates as well. The other one there is SMCO. It's a really long name. I'm not going to try to say it on a webinar. That's also known as hemolytic anemia or red water. It's probably more seen more in the kale type brassicas, but it's something to be aware of. It's really prevalent in the young, fresh leaves that are growing. So different to the cereal crops, where the more leaves is sort of dilutes those nitrogen and nitrates in there, but this compound will be concentrated in the leaves, in the fresh young leaves. So that's where it will the compounds basically rupture the blood cells. So the red water comes from the blood cells being excreted in the urine and giving it a bit of a pinky red tinge of a colour. So with brassicas, you really want to graze them when there's lots of leaf material, they've got a bit of height about them, and avoid any fresh new growth as it's coming. Probably when you've had a graze and you might want to go back and sort of later in winter, a little bit of more sunnier weather when they get growing again. So just be aware at that time. One, from an animal health point of view, one of the things that can pop up is a B1 deficiency. And that's because of we think it's because of the sulfur content that's in there. It has this sort of microbial shift in the rumen, and it starts to knock out the microbes that will actually create B1. So sheep are able to create all of their own B1 in there from their rumen microbes, but when we have a bit of sulfur in there and we have this sort of microbial shift, that sort of pathway doesn't happen anymore. So we can end up with an enzyme being created that actually breaks down all of the B1 that's potentially created. You'll see it, they sort of might look blind. Excuse me, not to be confused with sort of wandering around like a prig dog sort of thing, but you'll see them sort of looking like they're blind or they're pressing their head. From that side of things, it can be pretty easily rectified with a B1 injection to help them along. And we've gone into some other ways to sort of help that rumen as well. The other thing that can happen, particularly on brassicas, is they're pretty nitrogen hungry, so they tend to have a fairly high nitrate content as well. And we'll get into now a little bit in a minute and how that nitrate issue works. Yeah. So with our nitrates, when we get these cloudy days, the plants aren't doing that deeply growing, so the nitrates will tend to build up a little bit. You'll also see high nitrates once you put urea out, obviously, on your cereal crop to give it a bit of go-go. And sometimes coming out of a dry spell or a drought, or just sort of this dry summer, autumn, when there's a lot of nitrogen in the soil still too, that's going to be readily used, taken up by the plant. Now, the nitrate levels will tend to be in those young plants. They're sort of drawing that up, and it'll be located more in the stem, the stalk, in the bottom. So the leaves, the more leaves we have, the better, because it's diluted any nitrates that are in the system, and that's the parts that are going to go and eat as well. So we're sent to see also in cereal crops as well, and not just brassicas too. And there are a few weeds that we can hopefully get rid of. They don't really tend to eat them if they don't have to anyway, but they can be high in nitrates too. So when we look at how it works in the system, it's not necessarily nitrates that are the issue, it's the nitrites. So they'll hit the plant, it comes in as nitrate. As they start to break it down, the rumen microbes they've got this quick conversion into nitrite. You can get a bit of a bottleneck here, because the next stage to convert it into ammonia is a slower conversion. And that's where that carbohydrate, that energy and grain can come in to use some of that nitrogen up, convert it from nitrite to ammonia, and use it to create protein. So it's really nitrite in the system that can build up. And what that does, it actually replaces some of the oxygen on the red blood cells, and it effectively starves the animal of oxygen, because it will take the place of oxygen in the hemoglobin. So that's where we get why they die, is this buildup of nitrite in the system. So yeah, the animals will be able to, if they can use that, get that energy balance up, we can convert that to ammonia, into microbial protein and production. If we have too much ammonia and as well, like that will be converted into urea and has to be excreted in the urine. Now that does cost energy as well, and that's why sometimes a little bit of carbohydrate can help offset that sort of energy draw from breaking down this excess protein as well. So to try and reduce, obviously, nitrates, and what we can do there is really balancing it out with something that's low protein. So that's where cereal grain can come in to help balance it up. You only need a little bit, 100 to 300 grams. You don't want a lot, because we'll get this substitution effect of just eating grain and not eating the crop as well. But it's something to consider, just to help them bring that energy in. Providing some hay or straw, cereal hay or straw, that low protein. You don't want to go and put sort of vetch hay out, or lucerne or clover. We really want a cereal-based low protein hay or straw. And we want to fill them up. We'll get into this a little bit later as well, but it effectively helps dilute the protein that's sort of coming from the crop as well. We just want it to be palatable, something that they're actually going to want to eat. Should have taken a photo the other day. I saw some hay out, and it was really weather damaged, and the sheep had sort of picked around it, and they didn't really want to eat it. So you actually need something that they really want to eat to help balance this protein out as well, and nitrates. And you can always feed test it. You can always do a feed test, and you can get a nitrate test done on it, and it comes with a whole little graph of what's okay, what's safe, what's not safe as well. If you're putting some urea on, we really just need to get those leaves growing back. So you've got to be patient and wait a little bit. I like to sort of wait at least 2 weeks, 3, depending on what's happening, before you can put sheep back on there and graze it. Sometimes you can go a bit shorter, but it's just really have a look at the crop and just make sure you got lots of leaf there, which will help your crop last a lot longer anyway, because there's a little bit more feed on offer there for them. So in a little bit of a summary of cereals and brassicas, so when can we graze them? Like, really it comes down to they're not pulling the plants out of the ground. With brassicas, we want a bit more height about them. We really want them to get going. We get that sort of purpley tinge in the leaves there as well, so we can dilute some of that SNCO, for example, in there. So we really want a bit more height in our brassicas when we graze them. When do we remove cereals? It's usually around mid-August around here. Probably will vary on your location. But we want to pull them off if we're going to use that crop to go through to grain harvest. So that might be a little bit more area dependent. And with your brassicas, it's just really when they've chewed all those leaves off that we want to pull them off. They're not really going to eat too much more of that. The beware times is really post urea application with our cereals. Just have to be patient and have that wait. And with our brassicas is if we get any fresh, a whole new flush of fresh new leaf growth, that they'll have really high levels of those compounds that we really need to try and balance out. So just be a little bit patient with those two things. I've thrown in a little bit on weaning as well, because a lot of lambs are weaned and then put onto crops. And I just really wanted to remind everyone about the implications of the stressful time of weaning. So they'll lose fluid, they'll have a depressed appetite, and it's important to keep water up. So I know some people sort of might try to do crops and go, oh, there's plenty of moisture in there, but having a source of water, fresh water, is still really important, particularly for lambs, but even so for ewes, especially in lactation, that they need have a pretty good water requirement, even though it's, there's moisture in the plants. So with our lambs, we really want to make sure that we keep them sort of as less stressed as we can. Really need to focus on those minerals too. So when they go into their kind of flight or fight response because they think they're going to die because they've been weaned off mum, that sort of can lead to calcium deficiency. So it's good to have the lambs exposed to those licks and especially calcium, sodium and magnesium before they're weaned, because I've seen that happen at weaning time. We'll put licks out afterwards, but they're just of the stress of weaning, they can go into a calcium deficiency issue as well. So just bear that in mind. And the trace minerals too, they come in to really help their immune system because it is depressed at weaning time. They sort of got all this, extra stresses going on that's drawing a lot of nutrients into them. So we want to make sure that we can sort of support them as best we can so they reduce that weaning check so they can get on and get growing. The Winning with Weaners program covers a lot of that stuff, so check that out as well. So there's a little bit on sheep health just before they go on a crop. Just make sure you do for your lambs, obviously, your 2 doses. Marking weaning is the most common time to do it because there is a high risk of pulpy kidney going on to that fish growth as well. So that's the biggest thing you want to worry about. With pre-lambing, do it pre-lambing. It's your biggest bang for buck from your vaccinations. Because it'll protect the ewe and it'll protect that unborn lamb for a little bit as well. So that's another really good time to do that. From the drench side of things too, pre-lambing drench, same again, best bang for your buck at the drench time then, and then obviously at weaning as well. So whilst there's probably less chance of worms on some of the crops, worm egg counts will easily tell you quickly and cheaply where they're at, what's going on, and what you might need to do or not do in some cases. And from the nutrition side of things, it's really about getting that cereal, hay or straw into them. Now that picture there is a really good way of how to waste your hay, but I really wanted to just point out that those lambs will get into it, they'll eat it. It's got to be nice and fresh and palatable. Doesn't necessarily, when I mean high quality, it's not weather damage, it's not dusty, it's not moldy, all those sort of things. It can just be nice, fresh cereal, hay or straw, something that they actually want to eat. And you need to fill them up before they go on crop. They want a really good full rumen of hay or straw to help them adjust to that crop of all that lush green feed coming in. Whilst they're on crop, and I'll probably say this about another 10 times, is to keep some of that straw out because they will chase it. They really like that fibre and they will look for that bit of dry feed. The other alternative is, if you're fortunate enough, just depending on your paddock placement, if you've got a paddock that's adjoining, preferably, that has a bulk of dry feed in it, that's another way to just let them go in there, have a pick, let them chew on some of that dry feed. Just in that, you'll see them come back and forth between the paddocks as they want to get off the crop. They also want to maybe get out of the wet ground as well onto a paddock that's a little drier. But the hay really helps slow everything down, helps absorb all that nutrients that are in the crop, the energy and protein, all those sort of things, and the microbes can get in there and do their work a lot better. And also remember that we'll provide a little bit of vitamin D. So that's always a bonus when we're grazing some of these crops where we need all these interactions to sort of fall together to get the most out of it and keep the animal healthy. If you're looking at, in some cases, we've got the ability to put animals on and off the crop, like that's always good, like introducing slowly for a few hours a day as you build that up. I would recommend in the afternoon because the plant should be hopefully actively photosynthesizing then, drawn up and drawn up and use some of those nitrogen and nitrates that are in the system, when we get these really cold, frosty mornings, the plants really aren't doing a lot. So they're really quite high in some of those nitrates and that sort of thing. So we need to really wait till they're actively growing, which is the afternoon is a lot better. And the sheep tend to be a little bit more settled and a bit cruisier in the afternoon as well, as they sort of have their little afternoon naps. So yeah, that high moisture in the crops, again, cereal hay will help that. And if we want to try and balance some of that protein out, cereal will help dilute some of that. And we can add in some cereal grain, for example, to help balance that up. But it will also help teach your lambs what cereal grain is. So that might be a benefit later on if you want to finish them off with a bit of extra grain. Teaching them imprinting is amazing. It works for loose licks or loose blocks as well. From that side of thing, teaching them what it is, so they're actually going to eat it. And then you might need to just look at balancing out your cereal grain, particularly for calcium, to top up those low calcium levels in grain as well. And the other thing too is that both hay and grain, it just gives the animals a little bit of warmth over winter. So hay being slowing everything down and doing all that microbial fermentation naturally creates energy and heat as energy in there to keep that animal warm. So really good way to sort of keep the animals warm, so they're not sort of using extra energy to stay warm as well. So to bring it all in together, it is a really great way we need to really preload with that hay and or minerals. I did have a question come in that asked, should I preload the minerals before I put them into a crop? Depends a little bit where they're coming from, but certainly the sodium, that getting that some salt out to them is the first big tip. And if you can, you're going to wean lambs onto a crop, give them some of the minerals with mum, so she will teach them what it is and understand that that's a drop. We'll go there and we get some of our salt and lime, nutmeg, and other minerals in there. So that's a really good way to sort of set that lamb up for going onto crop to be weaned, and then onto a crop. Put those minerals too, like near a water point, and the hay as well. So they'll come in and they'll have a drink, and they've got that animal behaviour, the patterns, how they move through the paddocks throughout the day. And that will ensure that they're fun, that they get it as well. If you put it in a completely other corner that they don't very, very regularly frequent, it's you'll wonder why it's still there probably. So yeah, preloading with hay meals. We want that rumen full of hay before they go on the crop, and if possible, teach them what those minerals are and the feed trough and all that sort of thing as well. Always have it on hand, so you can get it under a tree is a bit better. Might protect from a few showers, that sort of thing. She can get fussy when the hay gets damp, so that might be one way to sort of keep it going for a little bit longer, and just sort of keep it up to them while you can. Talked a little bit about ensuring that they still have some water. I'm sort of a big fan of that. If they not drinking so much, they're not eating so much, we sort of see that slowed growth, slowed performance as well. You might want to consider topping up a little bit of grain on some of the crops if you've got that available to you. It will help that paddock last a little bit longer and help that lamb or you get a little bit more out of the crop as well and use that protein. And then finally, coming up to before putting them onto crops is the use of something like a containment pens in autumn or late summer, just to give the paddocks a rest or get some early sowing done. And we'll get right into that in our next session as well. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a nutshell. One of the other questions, sorry, I just remembered that came in, was about magnesium and its effect on wool. So magnesium doesn't have a direct effect on the wool. So where magnesium plays a role is within the system physiologically and as cofactors of enzymes. So the trace minerals are really quite important for wool, and things like sulfur as well. Where magnesium comes in is that it will help the animal be calmer effectively. Like if we have some good magnesium levels come in, it has a role in their muscles in particular. And where it sort of fits is that you don't want too much magnesium in general, because it can potentially lead to urinary calculi or water belly. Happens more so in merino weathers when they're more in a feedlot type scenario. When we put it out in licks, the sodium and the salt content and the sort of unpalatability of the magnesium really pulls up how much magnesium they're going to get. We're actually trying to get the magnesium into them more often than not, rather than having an excess as well. So you could get an excess through water if you've got bore water, but that's probably the other end of the scale. So it's not going to affect the wool quality directly per se, but it's going to help that animal to be healthier and be more productive in the sense of metabolically, and rather than that direct effect on the wool. But on the other extreme is that if it's too high, they can get urinary calculi, and that can be an issue more so in the rams and weather side of things. I think that was all my questions I had today. So hopefully that will help you out. Lots of cereal hay out, get those big chunky macro minerals in, some trace minerals too if you can. And best of luck for the season coming up. And next week we will have our webinar on sheep nutrition in drier times. We will get into some more on the quality and quantity side of things and assessment there. So if you missed some of that today, we'll tackle that next week in managing sheep in dry time. So be sure to register. That way it'll ensure you'll get the link, and you'll also get a link to the replay as well. So have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.